Yeah, I don't think I could pull off one of those hairstyles. Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. In this video we're taking a look at a movie that I have been interested to see since I first learned about it, and that movie is Dandilicious. First shown in 2021 and officially released to the general public in 2024, Dandilicious follows Marty, a teddy boy living the life of a public menace within his own town by getting into fights and causing disruption on the streets. Written, directed and starring Andrew Games, the movie also features performances from Jade Mark, Christian Greenway, John Purcell, Daryl Blackburn, Katrina Hill, Bill Heeks, Emmett Meehan, Chloe O'Gorman and Michael D. So why did I decide to take a look at this film? Well, firstly, I learned about this movie being in development a few years ago and it did genuinely sound and look quite interesting. And secondly, there's a few people that I know and a few friends of mine that actually did work on this. Dandilicious is a low-budget, self-financed movie that has been in development since 2016 with production starting in 2018. They even used a Kickstarter campaign to try and get the movie finished. Unfortunately, like a lot of movies that were in development in 2020, this movie was impacted by the COVID pandemic. But once that was all over, Dandilicious went on a bit of a tour around the film festival circuit. It gained a lot of high praise from a lot of critics and people who saw it. And now in 2024, the movie is officially available to the general public. And with this movie now being available to stream, one of the people that I know that worked on this movie reached out to me. They knew about this channel and they know what it is that I get up to on here. So they asked if I'd be interested in having a look at this movie and giving it an honest review. So I said okay. I was even given exclusive access to check this movie out before its official release on Amazon Prime. So I have finally been able to check this movie out, and I've got to admit, it's actually pretty good. Dandilicious takes place in 1959 and sees the local and self-proclaimed king of the Teds, Marty, stirring up trouble in his hometown of Listminister and ruffling the feathers of some very dangerous people. The movie, for the most part, is very light on story with a very simple and straightforward premise. But that isn't really the focus of this movie. This movie is much more focused on being a character study of a character called Marty, the king of the Teds. At the centre of everything that happens, it is focused on both him and the impact that he has on the people around him. He is the anchor and driving force behind the entire movie and is by far the most engaging and interesting part of this film. We are let into his mind, his motivation and backstory through a series of really good monologues, all performed excellently by lead actor Andrew Games, that help humanise this in Marty's own words, Marmite character. Writer and director Andrew Games delivers a gripping and captivating performance that holds your attention from the opening monologue all the way through to the end. He is a difficult character to bring to life, but I feel like the way that Andrew goes about performing as this character, I think that he's done a brilliant job here, and he portrays every aspect of this character really well. The narcissism, the charm, and the Cockney accent that he's got to maintain. The way that he's written, the way that he's both performed and directed, I do think that the way that this character is handled, you do start to empathise with him, especially later on in the movie. I mean, you don't condone anything that he gets up to, but you do understand his mindset. He handles himself really well in the fight scenes. He has a few speckles of humour here and there. He has a great presence whenever he's on screen, and the performance from this character, who dominates most of the screen time, is excellent. I think that everyone who does appear in this movie is doing a pretty good job with their roles, such as John Purcell as Gordon Colquhoun, Daryl Blackburn as Thomas, Katrina Hill as Dorothy, Jade Shaw as Mary, and Bill Heeks as Husky. But the standouts for me include Jade Mark, who gives a great and believable performance as Brenda, who actually gets quite scary when someone gets on her bad side. There's Emmett Meehan as Domino, who can be a tad over the top, but the performance does work overall, and he does have a proper intense presence to him. And finally, Christian Greenway as Big Tony, who acts as the main antagonist. He honestly is pretty threatening, and I love that he isn't someone who just shouts at people. He's pretty calm and quiet, and that works really well and does make him feel like someone not to underestimate. There's also a really good scene where you find out his motivation and reasoning for why he hates teddy boys, and you do understand where he's coming from. I kind of wish that we do see him actually interacting with other teddy boys to try and help build up the threat that he does pose to Marty, but overall I do think that he is good. To be honest, I would have liked to have seen more teddy boy characters actually appearing in this alongside Marty and one other character that gets introduced, because as it stands it literally does feel like it is just these two characters causing trouble in the city of Listminster. So I definitely feel like we could have seen a little bit more of their community. I do think that everyone is doing well in this movie, some more than others, but it does look like everyone is having a load of fun making this. Some characters do feel a bit underused and not really given enough to do, and that even goes for some of the central characters like Brenda and Gordon, who, while both good, I think that their stories are quite rushed and I don't think that they're given enough screen time, at least enough to properly develop them. Plus, there's two other characters that appear in this movie quite early on. There's Emily, played by Chloe O'Gorman, and the police constable, played by Michael D, both of whom I thought were going to have much larger roles. They both get pretty memorable introductions, especially Emily, who just bursts onto the screen, but after the opening sequence you never see either of them again. Both characters get built up as potentially large parts of this film, especially the police constable, who even features on the poster. I thought he was going to be one of the central antagonists or just a constant thorn in Marty's side, but again we only see him early on. It is disappointing that neither of these characters have that much screen time, because I do think that both actors are giving some excellent performances. They are both clearly having an absolute blast making this. They're both really fun characters and I would have loved to have seen more of them. The thing is though, I know that there was more filmed with these characters. The trailers that I've seen for Dandilicious, as well as some of the production stills that have been released, do feature a lot of footage, a lot of scenes that aren't actually in the movie, so I do think that there is a lot of deleted or alternate scenes. That isn't a negative, because it doesn't feel like anything is actually missing from this movie, and I do think that narratively it all still works. Without credits, the movie is just over 2 hours long, and I do think that it does make the most of its runtime. Purely based on the opening sequence, I was expecting this film to have quite a quick and lively pace, but it slows down a bit after the opening titles, and that's the pace that it maintains with the occasional burst of speed. I definitely think that there are some scenes in this movie that could do with a bit of a trim. I do think that there are some scenes and some sequences, some shots that do linger and do go on a little bit longer than they really need to, and I think doing that might free up a little bit of space for those deleted scenes. But even so, I do think that this is the right length for this movie, and I do think that it does use its runtime mostly well. One thing that did surprise me about Dandilicious was the overall style and tone. I was fully expecting this film to be a gangster movie, but if anything, it has much more in common with a Western movie. It works really well. There's lots of echoes and callbacks to those kinds of films, like whenever Marty enters a bar, and this absolutely does feature some speckles of inspiration from movies by Quentin Tarantino and Guy Ritchie. All of this, as well as the setting, does help Dandilicious as a movie stand out more. And with this film taking place in the 1950s, it does require a lot of very unique hairstyles, costumes and more to help sell the time period. And I think they've done an excellent job here, and all the research that went into the development of this movie has really paid off. All of this helps sell the immersion into this time period through its visuals, its choice and style of music, the pop culture references. Even Elvis, Cliff Richard and Laurel and Hardy all get a shout out. The props that everyone uses, including the weapons, combs, scenery and even an old photography camera. The simple and sometimes exaggerated hairstyles that were quite popular for the time. The colourful costumes and wardrobe choices, which all look great. Plus, and for a low budget movie, the vehicles that appear, including cars and a proper old school red London bus. That was pretty impressive. Unfortunately, there are some continuity errors that do slip through the gaps, such as cyclists in the background of one of the scenes, and one very noticeable no smoking sign in a pub. And this is meant to be a time period where even kids' cartoons were advertising cigarettes. I still can't get over that Flintstones one I've seen. It's only small things like that, but there's nothing too distracting, and I do think that overall the work and research that has gone into making this movie and trying to make it as accurate to the time period as possible is genuinely excellent. One thing that I did find a bit distracting is the overall sound design, which can be a bit 50-50 at different times of the film. Some things in this movie do sound really good and fit and work really well, but then there's other elements, particularly during some of the fight sequences and some of the scenes that use ADR, where it is a bit mixed overall. The ADR and general voice recordings can be different from scene to scene. It can be a bit noticeable every so often, especially during some of the external sequences, but I don't think that it's too distracting, and I do think that overall it is good. I do like a lot of the sound effects that they do use throughout this movie, and I do think that they are quite fitting, but as I said, when it comes to some of the fight sequences, it can be a little bit mixed. The fight sequences in Dandilicious, especially the first bar fight, are pretty brutal. The choreography is good and scrappy, and it does feel pretty raw, especially how they use makeup for the injuries, but the sound effects and Foley they use don't always sound as powerful or as forceful as I think that they should be. It does make the fights feel more real and hard hitting, but I definitely think that some elements, especially what they do with a baseball bat, could have been exaggerated a little bit more. The soundtrack is pretty good though. Dandilicious features a load of music and songs from a variety of different artists and composers. These include Furious, Dominic Halpin and the Honeybees, Crank Williams, Reed Anderson, Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers, and much more. It is a really good and fitting soundtrack that mixes together drama and rock and roll. A lot of the songs that are featured do feel very accurate to the time period, to the point where there was actually a little bit of me that was convinced that some of them actually were older songs. I really did like it overall. It does help help highlight the Western vibes, and I do think that it does sound really good and very fitting overall. One other aspect that I really did like about this movie was the cinematography and the overall look of the film. There's some really decent visuals, and the use of lighting is really good in some scenes. There is admittedly a few dark sequences that could have been lit a little bit better because it can be a bit hard to see what's going on, but I really love the filter they've used to give everything a slightly older, sometimes yellowy sort of look. There's a few little speckles of film grain, and I like how the movie does shift between aspect ratios. I genuinely thought that the entire movie was going to be in that 4:3 aspect ratio purely based on how long the opening sequence was, but I knew that the movie was mostly going to be in widescreen purely based on what I had seen in the trailers. It is a really clever idea, and I do like how it is used to kind of help separate what's actually going on in the real world and what's going on in Marty's head. I also really like that those 4:3 sequences do look and feel like an actual documentary that you would find from those times. I do think that the framing can be a little bit mixed at times, with some shots, especially the ones done handheld, can lead to things being cut off or disappearing off screen, but then during some of the 4:3 scenes there is a load of headspace above Marty, so I don't know if this was always intended to be a mixture of different aspect ratios or whether it was meant to be just full screen or widescreen or just the 4:3, but I do like the mixture, and I think that how it's used to separate those two different perspectives does work really well. I'm a little bit split on the focus pulling as well, where there are shots where it does seem to go in and out of focus. It works fine for the 4:3 sequences because it does add to that documentary feel, but outside of those sequences it is a bit 50-50, and I'm not sure that they work as well. But at the same time, I do understand that this is a very low budget movie, and the creative team that has worked on this film has done some incredible stuff with all of the stuff that they had access to. The work, the dedication, the research, the ambition and the passion that has gone into making this movie has really paid off, and I am really impressed with what it was that they have been able to do. It is so hard trying to get a movie made, but the fact that this team were able to not only do it, the community that was built up around it, the fact that this movie went off to go and do the film festival circuit and got pretty high praise, and the fact that this movie is now being distributed on Amazon Prime is genuinely impressive. So honestly, well done to them. Overall, I wasn't sure what to think when I started this movie, but by the end I did genuinely think that it was a really good and ambitious film. It's light on story for the most part, as I said, but it more than makes up for it with a great character study and the impact that that character has on the people around him. Some of the characters can be a bit underdeveloped and others underutilised, and while there are some performances that don't quite hit the mark, I do think that everyone is doing a great job and having a blast, especially Andrew Gaines as Marty. I love the setting, tone, style, Western vibe and the attention to detail to help root this movie very much in the 1950s era, from the props, the hairstyles, to costumes, vehicles and more. Yes, there are a few continuity errors that do slip through the cracks here and there, but they aren't too distracting. The audio and ADR is a bit 50-50, with some bits sounding great and work really well, while other sections are a bit mixed overall. I also think the occasional shift in focus and handheld movements from the camera can be a bit mixed as well, with the documentary styled fourth wall breaks working fairly well, but outside of those segments it can sometimes be a bit distracting and cut things off. But other than that, it does have some great looking visuals and cinematography, and how the aspect ratio is used is pretty creative. I do reckon this could do with a slight trim at a few moments, and the pacing can shift from time to time, but even so this does use its runtime mostly well. This is a really good and well made film that is engaging, entertaining, surprisingly quite brutal, and mixed with some speckles of funny and dark humour, great monologues all delivered excellently, and features some genuinely great performances and soundtrack. I would recommend giving this a watch if this does look and sound like something that you'd be interested in. I don't think this is going to be for everyone, but I will encourage you to at least give this a chance. This movie and everything that has gone into developing it is a big achievement for small budget indie movies, and I reckon this will be a great inspiration for up and coming filmmakers, and I am really looking forward to seeing what the creatives who worked on this get up to in the future. So with all that being said, my rating for Dandilicious is a 7 out of 10. This was a really good and fun movie, and I'm genuinely glad that I got the chance to actually check this out. And also thank you to Andrew Gaines and the producers behind this movie who gave me early access to it. That was genuinely awesome. I really appreciate you reaching out, and thank you so much for your kind words as well. And good luck on your next projects. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen Dandilicious, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See you guys.